everybody. Welcome to the POCACITO webinar today on Tuesday well, Eastern time it's 12 p.m., so it's a lunchtime session. Then for our speaker, it's a 6 p.m. session, so it's more a dinner time session. So welcome everybody here to the POCACITO webinar. My name is Max Grünig from the Ecologic Institute in Washington, D.C. I welcome you to the second iteration of the POCACITO Postcard Cities of Tomorrow webinars, where we discuss the future of urban sustainability from different perspectives, both from European viewpoints and also American viewpoints. I'm very excited to have here with us today Jonathan Leonardsen from Denmark, from Copenhagen, who works at Ramboll as an engineering consultancy, working on adaptation projects, especially cloudburst projects, on the socioeconomic costs and benefits of these measures, working with cities all over the world, having a lot of experience, not only in Europe, but also in the United States. I'm very excited to have you here today, Jonathan. Of course, we also have quite an audience here with us today in the room. You're all muted for now, so don't be surprised by that, but you can ask us questions either by raising a hand or by asking questions in the questions tab. This webinar is also being recorded for you for having a look at it later, or for people who have missed the webinar, so you'll see the slides and also hear the audio later on. And you can also, of course, contact us after the end of the webinar via email or on our LinkedIn group to ask more questions about how the webinar is actually, well, how to follow up on specific aspects, or about sharing the information in your networks. So that's for it for now. I will yield the floor now to Jonathan, who will tell us more about his work and his experiences in adaptation measures and programs in cities. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan? Yes. You can anytime now start. You can share your screen and the presentation. If you have an issue, I can also jump in there.
I will share my screen. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right. Well, hi everybody, and thanks for coming out at this time. I'm calling in from Copenhagen, Denmark, and it's very dark outside, and it's 6 p.m. So I really appreciate that you all wanted to join in at these various hours, depending on, of course, where you sit. My name is Jonathan Leonardsen, as Max said. I'm a senior consultant at Ramboll. We are an engineering firm, and basically we're an independent engineering and design consultancy, and we also provide management consultancy, which is the division where I sit. We were founded back in 1945, right after the war, by two engineers who wanted to improve the world, and we have a quite strict ethical codex that we live by, and we're not allowed to work in various projects that are, for instance, related to war or nuclear power plants and other things that could damage the world. We are roughly 13,000 people globally, and we have around 300 offices in 35 countries. And we're particularly strong in the Nordics, the EU, and the Americas. We're owned by a foundation, so we have absolutely no shareholders apart from our foundation, which is quite relieving in terms of there's no shareholders who are pressing us for massive revenues. And as I mentioned, we provide services in as an engineering firm within buildings and transportation, within planning and urban design, water, which is what I'm going to focus a lot on today, the environment and health sectors, energy, oil and gas, and management consulting. Yeah, just a quick show of where we are. And as you can see, we're quite a few places in the US. We recently purchased a company called Environ, which some of you may know or may not, which is, there were roughly 1,000 people sitting in the US. So now we have offices in many different places within the US. So we're here to talk about adaptation, and the thing that I'm going to focus on is cloudbursts or heavy rain, extreme rain events. We have a term for it there's an English term for it, which is cloudburst, which is a very good way of making an image out of this massive event where the clouds burst and the streets are just flooded. We've been working on this topic since in the late zeros, so around 8, 9, 10, we really started focusing on this topic in Copenhagen, and in 2011, the city of Copenhagen published a climate adaptation plan that looked at the risks of flooding, the risk of cloudbursts, the risk of sea level rise, urban heat islands effects, and other various climate change related impacts that the city would experience over the coming years. They did an analysis that looked at, well, what are the risks of flooding and what are the costs related to those risks. And what you can basically see here on this page is that on the x-axis we have all the years going up to 2100, and on the y-axis we have the yearly risk in Danish currency kroner, and the analysis showed, well, sea level rise is not an issue right now. It will be a big issue in the future, whereas cloudburst, that is an issue right now. And that analysis was right. 2 weeks after the issuance of the cloudburst or the climate adaptation plan, we had major cloudbursts in Copenhagen. We had damages, insurance-related damages of roughly $1 billion US, and we're a city of 600,000 people, so it's quite a lot of damages for a fairly small city. And these risks are going to continue. We're going to have increasing costs of increased cost of damages due to cloudburst and due to a lack of adaptation. And this is what we're really focusing on a lot when we're talking about some of the co-benefits of adaptation, which is there are costs of doing nothing. If we continue on the paths as we are, there are big costs of doing nothing. We're exposing our society to a massive risk, which every year is going to generate a negative revenue. Speaking from a very boring financial terms, but we have costs within cities, and they're just going to increase over time if we don't do anything about them. We try to explain these risks in various ways. There was the bar chart as we saw before, but we're also working in GIS layers, looking at where are the hotspots for critical infrastructure. Now, when we're talking about co-benefits and when we're talking about developing cities, we don't necessarily only want to look at, well, what are the values of the damage cost, because the damage costs are strictly related to the asset value of what is flooded. So if you have a very expensive house with a lot of expensive things in it, chances are, of course, that you're very rich, and therefore you will be seen as a high priority area from an economic risk approach. But you want to also start talking about other aspects. Where do we have areas that are at risk, which have social inclusion issues, or have other problematic, there is a low education rate, but there is a high unemployment. Areas that are socially challenged in some ways, and map that together with some of these economic figures, and sort of identify where do we have socially critical areas, and where do we have areas that are at risk of being flooded, and using these maps as a way of prioritizing areas within your city. So we have done a lot of different cost-benefit analysis for the city of Copenhagen, and one of the things that the city has looked at, also with using other consultants, is, for instance, well, the cost-benefit analysis of the risk level. So we have, we know that, or rather, let me rephrase. You want to design your cloudburst adaptation strategy up to a certain occurrence level. So that could be a 100-year storm, which is in, or a 200-year storm, 400-year storm, or a 50-year storm, which of course varies from city to city based on rain data. But what we looked at was that at one point it becomes too expensive to start investing in a higher level of safety, because the benefits of that increased level of safety were simply too low. You reduce, you get to a point where getting to a handling that much more water would require massive investments and only provide very small risk reductions. And so by having this very detailed analysis of these different occurrence intervals, we ended up with a line that said, all right, around a 100-year storm would fit in the city of Copenhagen. And we see quite clearly that other cities such as Rotterdam and London and Melbourne, they're also working with the 100-year reoccurrence period standards, or it's becoming a standard, but it's not necessarily something that we would recommend every city is just to copy it, because sometimes it doesn't make sense to invest in a 100-year storm protection level because it's too expensive. You would want to reduce your investment down to a 50-year, because that's actually where it makes the most sense, where it makes the most sense for the city as a whole, and where you could also focus more on providing solutions that are more focused on blue-green infrastructure that provides other co-benefits to the city. Whereas once you get up to above the 100-year event, up to a 400-year event or something like this, you would need massive pipes underground in order to manage all of the water. So the question is, of course, why do we build the business case? Why is all that necessary? And it is because when we work with economics in a planning situation, it's and especially in a public situation, it's a question of prioritization of scarce resources. You want to know, are we spending our money and the citizens' money in the most cost-effective manner? And we can do that in various ways. Usually we do what is called an ex-ante analysis, which is prioritization among competing alternatives, which is, you know, a feasibility study or a master plan of an area. But you could also work on evaluating previous initiatives, which is an ex-post evaluation. And that is actually something that we would recommend that more cities do, because it's not something that's done enough in order to really understand the impacts of an initiative. And then finally, and this is, I think, something that's especially interesting in the US, where you have a much stronger market for developers, and the developers are much more involved in decision making of urban areas and strong here, and likewise we have citizens that are more engaged with with city administrations. So it's also about understanding how the cake is distributed, understanding how benefits falls into different baskets, how, for instance, when we're talking about initiatives that have an impact on real estate prices or protect a certain area's real estate, well then the local owners union of that district or the real estate developer that owns that area can actually see a benefit in having some protection to his or her building or buildings. And now all of a sudden they could be engaged in speaking from financial terms and helping to co-create or sponsor or support the public spending within these areas. So, and I think co-creation is really key here, because you want to, and other, let's say we really enjoy working together with the city planners and the people who have the local knowledge on co-creating together with the existing infrastructure. So starting by, as you can see on the left side here, mapping all the urban functions, mapping the roads, mapping the green lines are the special bike pathways within the city of Copenhagen that are moving about, and you have metro lines and other various functions. And then on the right side, starting to design the water flow and the green, blue-green functions so that they complement and create alternative, nice transportation routes that could, for instance, off-limit or offload some of the heavy roads, heavily trafficked roads, create other good places for bicyclists or for pedestrians to move about, creating pathways from a residential area to the local school, where the kids can move around safely, and so on. And we want to look at having at using the economic analysis in these planning processes in the right way. So, for instance, when we're talking about the climate adaptation plan, this is where the socioeconomic analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, really makes sense, because you want to look at what are the different co-benefits of a plan, of a pathway that we're going to choose. Should we do something? Shouldn't we do something? What are the costs of no action? Is a blue-green approach better than a traditional pipes approach, which provides the most value? And then as we move along in the planning phase, so we get up to somewhere where you have a detailed first plan, start looking at master planning individual areas, and then in the end detailed solutions. You want to move away from the socioeconomics and move more towards creating the business case, creating what is the most cost-effective approach in this specific area, where you've already in the beginning set out and said, well, we actually want to focus on blue-green, and now when we come to the actual design of an area of solution, well, what is then the business case for it in this specific area? What is the most cost-effective way of doing it? And it's also something which this graph also shows another thing, which is not only the level of relevance, but also the level of trust you can put in your economists, in your consultants, because when we're talking about socioeconomics, the more specific we get, the less accurate the analysis becomes. We are taking a lot of assumptions on how society works, how people get benefits from different investments, from different changes in the urban landscape that we create with our cloud-first adaptation. And the more specific we get in what we're actually doing, the more assumptions we have to make in the socioeconomic side in order to actually assess it. So this is sort of a way of saying that that as we move along and as we get more specific and detailed, there's no real need for all the socioeconomics. This is what you want to do when you're planning, when you're discussing at a more strategic, at a more political level. Should we do something? Shouldn't we do something? And which approach should we choose? And what I come to now is of course, well, what is it then that we're looking at? And when we're looking, for instance, at these avoided costs that I talked about, it's one thing is of course to look at the physical damages in the economic sphere, which you can see on the left. Physical damages, of course, loss of content, replacement cost of buildings and infrastructure. But there's also, for instance, output loss, loss of a local business that has to be closed for a week while they're cleaning or pumping out water, or even for months. And we've seen that in many cloudbursts that some local businesses, they're out for months and months while they have to restore their spaces for the shops and restaurants. There's some social avoided costs to consider, which is injuries, fatalities. There was just a massive cloudburst in the southern part of Spain this weekend where 2 people lost their lives. In Copenhagen, we've seen, I think, at least 1 or 2 deaths in relation to the really big cloudbursts. And then, of course, there's the mental stress and anxiety of being flooded, of being, of having to deal with an emergency situation, of not being able to live in your home, of being evacuated, and so on. In the US, there's also a lot of focus on, especially some utility companies have a guideline and are restricted sort of more on the environmental quality of water. So CSOs, for instance, is something that you want to avoid. You want to get away from this because you're fines by the state that when you have CSOs. So CSO abatement is something that's really is a socioeconomic aspect, but is also a very concrete business case for the individual utility. And so these are all aspects that are talking towards what is that we're preventing when we're investing in cloud-based infrastructure. But this goes both for the traditional, the piped underground solutions, and the more alternative, the green infrastructures, the blue-green infrastructure, as we would like to call it, where you design spaces that that are attractive not only to people and to enjoy, but also provide natural habitat benefits, provide other types of social benefits, and also handle the rainwater. And here we're now starting to talk about creating values that weren't there before and that wouldn't come in a traditional engineering solution. This is, for instance, health benefits, people who are looking and enjoying the views, the greenery. There's tranquility, there is exercise, with people becoming more energetic. They're out in the new park that's established, or the renovated park. They're becoming more physically active, which provides health benefits. They're more recreational, active. They're out enjoying it, using it. There might be some modal shifts for transportation. People are starting to bike more, which is something that we also see a lot of cities in the U.S. doing, starting to invest more in sustainable streets, in bike infrastructure, and this is a perfect way to combine these two. And then of course there's the aesthetic values, actually just looking, enjoying, having the real estate increases that follows. There's an environmental aspect, pollutant removal from from added greenery, CO2 sequestration, and there's also a lot of other ecosystemic impacts that uh, environmental economists are getting better and better at putting a monetary value on, or putting an impact on, but which we haven't captured in what we normally work with within the US. And, and there are a lot of other aspects that you can look at. For instance, there's the traffic. So what are the traffic impacts that can happen, and how can we work together with our Department of Transportation in order to optimize and reach their political goals in terms of having X number of bikes moving through these streets per year, getting more people to get into to walking. And then there's the associated benefits from this. When you have more people biking than taking the car, but then there's reduced CO2 emissions, reduced local air pollutants. When people are biking, they're more active, which means increased health benefits, and so on. You can also start talking more about social inclusion, which is, of course, targeting areas that are socially challenged and investing in them and investing together with them. For instance, with talking together with some city authorities like NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authorities, on creating value for the local citizens in their social housing projects, creating urban farming and other things that create a social inclusion and builds social capital within that area that is being looked on. And then there's, of course, other types of economic growth, which is, for instance, one is increased productivity. When we are investing X number of million or billion within one city, so that will of course go to local workforce. But there's also increase in knowledge and expertise of specifically designed solutions to our neighborhood. And we've seen, for instance, in Denmark, a lot of businesses that are capitalizing on the knowledge that we're getting on the social projects. And there's a lot of small startups, consultancy startups that are getting into this market. And then, of course, with attractive urban spaces comes local businesses. There's a cafe that's going to open because more people are out in the street, or there's a coffee cart that's going to come down, or there's a restaurant, or there's some other types of businesses that follow along. There was a study done in the US a couple of years ago on the fact that in green streets lined with trees, people are inclined to spend more time in the shops that are aligned in these streets compared to streets without any trees. So we see also some local business opportunity and growth that relates to building the socioeconomic business case for this type of adaptation, and really showing, well, what are the co-benefits, not only from a water point of view, but from a city point of view, and also then engaging or being able to engage other city divisions, city departments, other stakeholders to create a common approach and to create an approach that fits the city and the city's politics as a whole, rather than just one single department working on its own. And the way that we present this is, of course, to monetize it, as you can see here, with, of course, you have capital cost of infrastructure as a minus, you have operational costs as a minus, you have to finance this in one way or the other, which is a minus. But then you have all the avoided economic costs, and they're usually, that's where you get the big bang for your buck, so to say. Then you have other avoided social costs, and you add all these things up, and in the end you end up with a business case which is usually positive, because we're creating a lot of value in these areas, and especially in areas that don't have a lot of social benefits or socioeconomic benefits at the moment. And what we then do in order to to move the conversation along is to create different types of cash flows and illustrate this, like the waterfall graph before, but also, having cumulative socioeconomic cash flows over time. This is for a project we did in Saudi Arabia, in the city of Jeddah, where you said, all right, we have two different scenarios. We're working with a low and a high scenario in terms of benefits and investments. And when did we start to break even from a socioeconomic point of view? And even though we had really, really big investments, this is in millions on the left. I think the exchange rate is probably something like 1 to 7. So 7 Saudi Arabian riyal for every dollar. So you have to divide all the numbers out on the left by 7. But basically, these are really, really big investments that we're talking about in a city of 3 million people. But they're actually very quickly capitalizing on the investments. And I mean, a payback time of 8 years or 11 years from a socioeconomic point of view is all investments in infrastructure and in making the city more livable, more attractive, more clean, more efficient, more safe. It's really a really good business case. And these are languages that a CFO or a financial department or an economic department within the city, the ones who manage all the budgets, well, this is the language that they understand and that they can engage in. And it's also a way of explaining to citizens and engaging citizens and saying, this is actually something that goes out and creates value to you every day, whereas we could also choose other ways that wouldn't add value. And these are very, very powerful tools. I'm not going to go too much into detail with our approach, but basically as I've said, we evaluate these two different types of solutions, usually at the surface, the blue-green solutions, and we have the subterranean solutions, the pipes. And we developed the investment operational cost, developed the benefits from that, developed the socioeconomic cost and benefits. Then we do some sensitivity analysis in order to make sure, are we actually, how far off the mark are we, how sensitive is this business case to shocks in terms of price and other aspects. And in the end, we end up with investment recommendation, and which is something that the city council can then move forward with, or the real estate developer or the developer or whoever it is who's going to take this moving forward. Yeah, well, modeling all of this in cash flows, and we try to provide illustrations of our work in many different ways, depending, of course, who is the recipient, who is it, who has to take the decision, and to illustrate that also some of the investments and the benefits, they fall at different times, and so on. So let me just, yeah, and this is now coming to the end of the slideshow, and I probably have caused a lot of confusion during my slideshow, and I hope that you just fire off questions to clarify, and I'll be happy to go back and explain more about a certain point. But basically, the entire message that we're coming with as economists, together with our adaptation planners, is that adaptation is not just a negative measure. It's an approach where we increase the recreational area and create more quality of life for our city and for the people who live in it, and that we want to create this in synergy with our city dwellers or citizens, with our businesses, with the local businesses. Basically, I mean, we want to design for the 99% of the time when the flood protection isn't needed. Because when we're designing for a 100-year event, well, we're also designing it to work in the 99 years where that event shouldn't happen, speaking sort of, statistically. But And this falls down to sort of a concrete message that the worst case scenario that we get from this approach and from using a socioeconomic approach to prioritize between different investments is that we get a more livable city that is attractive to.
Oh,
and
Jonathan.
Yeah.
Sorry, we just lost you there for a second, but yeah, you're back. That's good.
Okay, sorry. Well, basically, I was just saying that the best message is, or the message that we want to come across with is that when we're designing these big plans and these solutions, as you can see on the right side, that is actually a square in the city center of Copenhagen, which is now built and which works, and where you have water flowing in from the streets into the park in the middle, which is now lowered. And this is a historical area. This is an area where the buildings are 100, 200 years old. And we're designing for the worst case scenario, which is that we will never have to use it. There will never be a flood again. And all we end up with is a more attractive and more livable city. I think that ends my presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. This is really, I think, a very upbeat closing statement. I found this very interesting. I hope so did the participants here. And I want to open this now slowly to our participants. I, of course, have also some questions to you, Jonathan, but I wanted to ask first our participants in a quick poll. So in your city, does the city already take climate change into account in the planning? And you can submit your answers now. We can close the session. I think we still have a few people who haven't voted. So if you don't have to vote, of course, but I give you one more second here. And yeah, I think we can close the poll. We won't get more than that. So 33% said they take it into account, and 17% said not at all, and 50% said somewhat. So Jonathan, that means that there's definitely still some, I would say, potential for increasing the work that you do and for reaching out to cities. Jonathan, you mentioned already a few names. The last slide you showed us Copenhagen, and you mentioned the United States a couple of times. Do you want to just tell us real quick 2 or 3 cities you've personally worked with on climate change adaptation?
Well, yeah, I have personally worked with the city of New York. We're just finalizing a project for them. Where we've developed a pilot test study of cloudburst adaptation in New York City. Then we have working with the city of Seattle, and those are the 2 cities that I've personally worked with in the U.S. Our company is also working in cities such as Boston, or colleges such as Dartmouth, and we have various other places in the U.S. where we've worked on climate change adaptation, both sea level or storm surges and cloudburst adaptation. And then we've worked in a lot of cities in Europe on this aspect, also in Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned. So we have been involved with quite a few cities on cloudburst adaptation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. So obviously quite a range of cities, very different cities. I wanted to see if and when people in the audience have questions, you can either raise your hand, that's one option, or you can type in a question in the questions tab, and I would then hand the microphone to you. So you can ask questions now anytime. We want to use the few remaining minutes as efficiently as possible. And meanwhile, I have another quick poll for you. And that's regarding the important topic of co-creation that Jonathan brought up. And just a question, have you heard of this concept of co-creation for adaptation before? And it's a very easy poll, and it's just yes, no, or I can't remember. And that doesn't leave much room for doubt, I think. I hope we have covered all the options there. Okay, I'm going to close this poll in 3 seconds. And 2/3 have voted. Okay, thank you. And it seems that 2/3 of participants have not or had not heard about this concept, Jonathan. So I think that means that this is really, really, really interesting, and really a little bit where you can get also a lot of the economic benefits, maybe, or additional economic benefits. I found it really interesting that you said that usually you do have positive economic value. And the chart you were showing showed even in year 3 already positive cash flow. So very impressive. I think should make it more or less what people call a no-brainer, or you say, in the worst case, you get a better city, right? So that's not a real risk-taking there. I wanted to ask you, with these projects in these cities, do you get feedback after the project, once you're done, once you're out of the actual interaction? Do you then get feedback?
Yes, and we try to remain quite close to the cities that we work with, also in order to assist with questions that arise going forward. There's always a lot of debate on the figures that we've used and the models, and sometimes there's some fine tuning, sometimes there's aspects that need to be explained a bit more or developed a bit further. So we try to remain in close contact with our cities in order to make sure that they use, or that they are able to use, what we provided them with the best.
Excellent. One quick follow-up question here. In the POCACITO project, citizen participation is quite relevant or quite prominent. And I wanted to know what you think, what role citizen participation plays in your process and in your work experience.
I think citizen participation is quite a big thing in our work. We usually push quite hard for citizen engagement. When we're talking about co-benefits, the only way we can actually know if we're going to get these co-benefits is if we're talking to the people who we're building this for. And there's no better way to ensure that the final effects and the final impacts of whatever is designed actually come true than if it's done together with the local citizens. They know about the problems, and they can share knowledge about an area that you otherwise wouldn't find and you wouldn't know. So we use citizen participation in most of our projects, and we usually encourage as early involvement as possible.
Perfect. Well, that sounds really good, and I think also something that seems to make sense to me, that of course there's a lot of local knowledge with the local people. Now coming back to the people here in the webinar, I have one more poll for you to vote in on, and it's just basically a summary after having received all that input here today. I have a very simple question. So do you consider adaptation, one, a public expenditure? Do you consider adaptation a joint public-private effort, or do you consider adaptation a business case? Do you want to vote now? And I see 44% have already voted, which is pretty good. And I think about 67% have voted, 2/3. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So everybody who voted here has said that they see it a joint public-private effort. So nobody has said as simple answer, it's a business case. So Jonathan, in that sense, there's still some upward work to be done here, I think, on your side, on your behalf of working with the cities. But I think it's yeah, it's nice to see that it's considered a joint public-private effort. And I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this real quick. We still have the option to either you can raise a hand, and I can see there is a question. So, Erica, I will just open your microphone real quick. Just give me 1 second, and then you can actually speak directly once you're ready. I have unmuted you, and if you want to, you can go ask your question now. So it seems, yeah, you're having mic problems, but I think you're not the only one. I'm not sure that anybody can hear anybody right now. Yes, now I can hear you, Erica. Good.
Okay. No, that was my technical difficulty, not yours. So my question actually, so I live in New York, so I've actually observed this firsthand and very interested in the C40 city initiatives that's been developing over the years. So my question is that basically I would imagine that sometimes you run into resistance from developers that are looking for short-term gains. I wanted to know if you have any examples of successful negotiations in such a case. You know, it's a pretty open-ended question, but I'm just trying to figure out at either the policy level, you know, certainly you talk about, you know, citizen participation and stuff, but you're also dealing with a city such as New York, which is enormous. So it's open-ended.
So Jonathan, I pass it back to you. Erica, I'll mute you again. If you want to ask a follow-up, just send us a short message again, and I'll open the microphone again. Jonathan.
Well, thanks for the question, Erica. Developers are or can be a hassle when it comes to having concrete economic gains from their point of view. But what we can see is that when we engage them and talk about reducing the risks to their property, thereby making it more safe and less also unpleasant, there's no annoyances for their inhabitants, that is definitely a good argument. And then we of course see that having the blue or green, the recreative, the high quality recreative spaces around their buildings or in their landscapes and areas is something that really provides value, and is where that they can then sell off their units at a higher premium, or differentiate between units based on exposure to green aspects or green landscape and so on. So it's not something that we have the most experience with, but it is something where we have had talks, and especially something that's ongoing in Asia more than we have in the US.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan, for answering this. And I think it's indeed, Erica, what you pointed at is a very interesting also tension point, of course, between improving the quality of living in an area, and then the social pressure that this can create with rising real estate value and driving out maybe existing residents. So I see we have a follow-up question. Oh, yes, so Erica asked a follow-up whether you said that you had more success with that strategy in Asia than in the US. Is that, can you maybe confirm this again, Jonathan?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, we've had more engagement with private developers in Asia than we have had in the US. In the US, we've mainly been working together with cities. So in Europe, we've had talks with private developers, and in Asia, we have. In Asia, it's a bigger question.
Okay, Erica, does it answer your question?
Yes, it does. I just actually didn't hear initially exactly what Jonathan said. So yeah, so that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. So we have time for one more question. If anybody wants to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand or to ask a question in the question tab. If you don't have any questions right now, you can of course contact either Ecologic Institute or the POCACITO project through email or in the LinkedIn group, etc., etc. Or you can also get in touch with Jonathan directly. We'll also make the recording of this webinar available, of course, to all of you, so you can follow again what has been said and what was in the slides today. And I can already announce next week we plan to have our next webinar on December 13th with Sabine O'Hara, who is a professor at University of DC. She's the head of, or the chair of the causes. It's a chair for urban agriculture, sustainable urban agriculture here in Washington, D.C. It's for the insiders, it's the only land-grant university in the city. So it's kind of interesting. They do a lot of farming, a lot of agriculture, and she'll tell us a lot more about her work next week. I'll send around, of course, an invitation in due time later this week, so you can register and schedule this. But so you're already informed, you have a little bit of an edge over everybody else. Next week on December 13th, it's the next POCACITO webinar. Jonathan, do you want to say closing words before we end the session?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, thanks to everybody for attending, and please feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll also be happy to spend half an hour to answer some more specific questions you have in relation to the presentation at a time. Just arrange that. I am aware that this might have actually helped in not necessarily making so much more clear to you, but actually just raised a lot of questions and intrigued some interest in how this can also be applied in a planning situation. So I'll be happy to have that discussion with you if you want to. But otherwise, thanks a lot, and thanks, Max, for inviting me to this. It's really been a good opportunity, so thanks.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. It was a real pleasure to have you here in the POCACITO webinar. Thank you all for joining us today and for asking questions. I see we have another question coming in. Oh, it's just a comment. So thank you, Erica. Yes, thank you also for joining us, and I hope to see you back again next week. I'll end the session now and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.